The axe stopped mid-swing. For 3 years, Malachi Brooks had lived by rules of his own making. Swing until sundown. Speak to no one. Trust nothing that moved. In his mountain clearing, far above the reach of towns and law, he'd cut timber until his muscles ached, then slept on a cot rougher than prison boards. Solitude was his punishment and his penance, though he'd never spoken aloud what he was atoning for. But that morning, 2 figures stood at the edge of the clearing. Children, native twins, no older than 8. Their clothes were torn, their small hands clasped tight around a leather pouch that steamed in the chill air. Malachi let the axe fall heavy into the snow-packed ground. The girl stepped forward first. Her brother clung to her side, his knuckles white around the pouch's strap. Their eyes were not the eyes of children. Too old, too knowing. "We know what you did to our father," she said. The words cut deeper than any blade. Malachi had never seen them before in his life. And yet his throat went dry, because something in her voice stirred memories he had spent years trying to bury. A creak at night, a man's desperate struggle, the choking silence that followed. His scar, the thin line along his neck, burned as if her words had set it aflame. "I don't know what you're talking about," Malachi rasped, though the words rang hollow even in his own ears. The boy's voice was sharper, aimed like an arrow. "The man with the scar on his throat. You held him under until he stopped fighting." Malachi's hand went to the scar without thought. The children saw. Their eyes didn't waver. The girl tilted her head. "Good. You remember. Because we need you to do it again." Before Malachi could answer, the sound of hooves carried through the trees. A rider emerged, Cyrus Langford, the merchant with silver trim on his saddle and a smile too sharp to ever be honest. His polished boots looked wrong in the mud and pine needles. "Brooks," Langford called, too friendly by half. "Didn't expect to find you up here. Tell me, you haven't seen 2 native children, have you?" Malachi's lie came smooth, practiced by years of silence. "No." Langford dismounted, eyes scanning the clearing like a predator. "They've got something of mine, something their father stole before his accident." He let the word linger. Malachi felt it hit like a hammer. An accident. A man gasping underwater. A promise whispered with his last breath. Take care of them. Behind Langford, the forest breathed a whisper, a child's voice, just loud enough for Malachi to hear. "He's here." The pouch steamed. The children's eyes burned with something Malachi couldn't name. Langford stepped closer, hand brushing the pistol at his hip. Malachi's giant hand clamped down on his wrist before the gun cleared leather. For the first time in years, he spoke words that carried weight. "I wouldn't." Langford froze under Malachi's grip, his polished smile cracking. "That's how you did it, isn't it?" he hissed. "That's how you drowned their father, close enough he couldn't draw." The accusation ripped open memories Malachi had buried. The rush of water, the thrash of limbs, the silence that followed. For years he had told himself it had been an accident. But Langford's words made the truth taste bitter in his mouth. The girl's voice broke through the storm in his head. "Our father begged you, and you promised." Promised. Malachi staggered back, his hand trembling against the tree bark. The promise was there, deep in his memory. Jacob Running Bear's dying eyes, his whisper carried on the creek's mist. Protect them. Don't let Sterling have them. Now here was Langford, his name different, but his hunger the same. The merchant straightened his coat, wrist still sore from Malachi's grip. "They're holding a map," he said, eyes narrowing. The location of a silver mine their tribe has guarded for generations. Their father was weak. He thought hiding it would protect them. But children can be made to talk. The twins stepped from the shadows then, moving together, their small hands still clutching the pouch. The boy's voice carried clear and steady. "You'll never have it." Langford sneered. "You don't even know what you're protecting. That mine could build railroads, arm armies, more wealth than you'll ever see, Brooks. Think of what you could buy. Land, cattle, a town to your name." But the girl opened the pouch slowly, deliberately. Not maps, not silver ash. She let the gray dust scatter on the wind. "We burned it," she said, her face calm, eyes older than her years. "3 nights ago, when our father died. There's nothing left for you." Langford's face twisted purple with rage. "You little savages!" His hand darted for his pistol again, but Malachi stepped between him and the children, the merchant's barrel leveled at his chest, steady, sure. "One choice, Brooks," Langford said softly. "Your secret, or their lives." The clearing held its breath. The children's eyes locked on Malachi's scar. In them, he saw no fear, only faith, a trust that weighed heavier than the axe he used to swing. "You know what's funny about secrets?" Malachi said, voice low but steady. "They only have power if you're afraid of them." He took one step forward. The pistol barked, flame and smoke exploding in the air. Pain tore through Malachi's shoulder, but he kept moving, his massive hand closing around Langford's throat like a trap. "Run!" he roared at the children. But instead of running, the girl lifted her face to the sky and shouted in her native tongue, words that rolled like thunder through the trees. Langford's eyes widened in panic. "She's calling them!" he gasped. "She's calling the others!" From deep in the forest came the sound of hooves. Not one horse, many. The ground trembled as riders closed in from every direction. Langford struggled in Malachi's grip, eyes wild now. "You fool! You've started something you can't stop. This was never just about the mine. There are men in Washington who won't let this go." Malachi tightened his hold. He could feel the man's pulse hammering. The children pressed close together, their pouch now empty, but their eyes still burning. And then the riders burst into the clearing. Not soldiers, not traitors, warriors, faces painted for battle, led by a woman with silver in her hair and fury in her gaze. "Jacob Running Bear was my brother," she said, her voice cold as the wind off the peaks. Her eyes fixed on Malachi, and the knife in her hand found Langford's throat. "These are my brother's children, and you are the man who gave him the death he asked for." The clearing froze under the weight of her words. Malachi Brooks stood bloodied, his shoulder burning where the bullet had grazed him. His massive hand still clutched Cyrus Langford's throat, but now a knife gleamed at the merchant's jugular, held by the woman who had ridden in with warriors at her back. Her eyes, dark and sharp as obsidian, locked on Malachi. "My name is Ayanna Running Bear. Jacob was my brother, and those children are my blood." The twins, Ayanna and Kota, broke into a run, clinging to her legs as though they'd been waiting for this moment their whole lives. Relief washed across their faces, but their aunt's expression stayed hard, carved from grief and fury. Langford tried to speak, his voice rasping against the blade at his throat. "Ayanna, listen. This has nothing to do with you. The mine belongs to—" Her knife pressed deeper, drawing a bead of crimson. "You killed my brother for that mine, and you thought you'd use a white man's guilt to cover your tracks." Her gaze flicked to Malachi, weighing him as if she could see straight into his soul. "But Jacob told me the truth before he died. He said there was one man he could trust, a man who would keep his promise, no matter the cost. Malachi felt the words cut deeper than Langford's bullet. Promise. That night by the creek, Jacob Running Bear had whispered it into his ear with his last breath, and Malachi had fled into the mountains to bury the memory under years of silence. But now it was back, alive in Ayanna's eyes. "You don't understand," Langford hissed. "This isn't just about me. Washington knows. Military men, politicians, they all want what's under that mountain. You kill me, they'll send an army." A young warrior at Ayanna's side spat into the dirt. "Let them come." But Ayanna's frown deepened. Her gaze drifted to the twins, who clung tighter to her. "They will come," she said softly. "And when they do, it won't just be Langford's greed we'll be fighting. It will be the government itself." Malachi released Langford's throat, and the merchant staggered, only to find Ayanna's blade still resting against him. "Jacob asked me to protect them," Malachi said, his voice low. "I didn't understand it then, but I do now." The girl, Ayanna's niece, stepped forward, her small hand tightening around the pendant at her neck. "Our father trusted you. So do we." Malachi's chest tightened. For years he'd lived with nothing but his own guilt. Now these children were giving him something he hadn't asked for: trust. From the tree line, the sound of more horses shattered the moment. Not the rhythmic thunder of warriors, but the iron discipline of cavalry. Blue uniforms appeared between the trees, sunlight glinting on sabers and rifles. 20 soldiers at least, led by a captain with a hard face and eyes like stone. Langford's laugh rang cruel and desperate. "You see? I told you. Captain Morrison doesn't leave loose ends. This mountain belongs to the United States now." Ayanna's blade pressed harder against Langford's throat. Her warriors lifted their weapons, a dozen bows and rifles trained on the newcomers. The clearing teetered on the edge of bloodshed. Captain Morrison dismounted, his hand resting on his saber. His eyes swept the scene: the wounded giant, the native warriors, the terrified merchant, and settled on the twins. "Children," he said, his voice like gravel. "Step aside. You're coming with us. The government thanks you for your service." The boy shook his head fiercely. "We're not yours to take." "Ayanna." Running Bear's voice rose like thunder. "These children are not your wards. They are the heirs of Jacob Running Bear, and if you want them, you'll have to ride through all of us." The mountain air went still. 100 heartbeats balanced on the knife's edge of war. The soldiers fanned out with practiced precision, their boots crunching on pine needles. Rifles rose, aimed squarely at the line of native warriors. The clearing was no longer a sanctuary. It had become a powder keg. Malachi Brooks shifted his stance, his broad shoulders blocking the children from view. His left arm throbbed from the grazing bullet wound, but his right hand still gripped the axe he'd swung for years. Heavy, familiar, deadly. Captain James Morrison stepped forward, his saber glinting in the light. He was tall, his gray mustache neatly trimmed, his blue uniform immaculate. But what unsettled Malachi most were his eyes. Cold, calculating eyes of a man who believed the world was already his. "Mr. Langford," Morrison said evenly, "step away from that woman's knife. You're under the protection of the United States Army." Langford gasped with relief, though Ayanna Running Bear's blade never wavered. "About time, Captain. These savages—" "Quiet," Morrison snapped. His gaze never left Ayanna. "Return the children, now, or I will take them by force." Ayanna raised her chin, her voice ringing with fury. "My brother's children are not property. They will never be pawns for men like you." The captain's lip curled. "You speak of pawns, yet your brother served me once. He understood the order of things. Civilization claims what wilderness hoards." At those words, Malachi felt his stomach turn. He looked at the twins, Ayanna and Coda, who stood clutching each other, their eyes blazing with defiance far too old for their faces. "You'll start a war," Malachi growled, his voice deep enough to rumble through the clearing. "No," Morrison said with a thin smile. "I'll end one." The tension snapped. A soldier cocked his rifle, the metallic click echoing like thunder. Native bows drew tight. Ayanna pressed the knife harder against Langford's throat, drawing a line of blood. And then, with deliberate calm, Malachi stepped forward. "Captain!" he called out, raising his empty hand, palm outward. "If it's me you want, then take me. Leave them." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Why would I want you?" "Because I'm the man who killed Jacob Running Bear." The words left Malachi's mouth like stones dropped into still water. The soldiers stiffened. The native warriors hissed in disbelief. Even Ayanna's blade trembled for a heartbeat. Langford seized on the opening, snarling. "He admits it. He drowned Jacob himself." But Malachi's booming voice silenced him. "Yes, because Jacob asked me to, because he was dying, and because he made me promise to protect his children. That's a promise I intend to keep, even if it kills me." The clearing fell deathly still. Morrison studied him for a long moment, then sheathed his saber with a slow hiss of steel. "Very noble," he said softly. "But promises don't change destiny. The mine under this mountain will belong to the United States, and if you stand in the way, Brooks, you'll be buried with it." He turned to his men. "Fall back. Not today, but soon." The cavalry retreated into the forest, their departure heavy with unspoken threat. As silence returned, Ayanna Running Bear lowered her knife from Langford's throat. She looked at Malachi with something fierce and searching. "You would die for them?" she said quietly. Malachi nodded, his voice hoarse. "I already promised." The children stepped forward, each gripping one of his massive hands. And for the first time in 3 years, Malachi Brooks felt the weight of isolation begin to lift. But deep in his chest, he knew the truth. Captain Morrison would return, with more men, with more power. And next time, there would be no retreat. Night fell heavy over the mountains. The fire crackled in the clearing, throwing long shadows against the pines. Malachi sat with his back to a log, his bandaged shoulder aching. Across from him, Ayanna Running Bear watched with eyes that seemed to pierce through flesh and bone. The twins huddled close beside her, clutching each other as if they feared the darkness would snatch them away. The silence was broken when the girl, Ayanna, rose. She carried the empty leather pouch, the same one that had haunted Malachi's thoughts since he first saw it. Without a word, she knelt by the fire and untied the cord. Slowly, she turned it over, letting its contents spill into the flames. Not papers, not maps. Ash. Fine, gray ash that glowed for an instant before vanishing into the night air. Malachi frowned. "That's it? That's what everyone's been chasing?" Ayanna's voice was steady. "It was once a map. Our father burned it before he died. The mine's location is gone forever." Langford, bound at the wrists nearby, let out a harsh laugh. "Gone? You think Ash can stop men like Morrison? He doesn't need a map. He's got half the government behind him." Coda's small hands tightened into fists. "Then they'll never have it. We'll die before they do. Ayanna. Running Bear's gaze flicked toward Malachi. And what about you, Giant? Will you die for them too? The question cut deep. Malachi stared into the fire, seeing faces from his past. Jacob Running Bear's twisted in pain, his own hands holding the man beneath the water, the promise whispered through dying lips. For 3 years, he had hidden from that night. Now the children forced him to live it again. I already gave my word, he said, his voice rough, and I don't break promises. Langford sneered. Your word won't mean much when Morrison rides back with 20 rifles. You'll be outnumbered, outgunned, and hanging from a tree before dawn. Ayanna's blade flashed as she silenced him with a warning cut along his cheek. Enough. Her eyes stayed locked on Malachi. You killed my brother. You claim it was mercy. Maybe it was. But mercy doesn't end with death. It begins with protection. The children's eyes turned toward Malachi, wide and unblinking. Trust. A trust he didn't feel he deserved, but couldn't refuse. That night, as the fire died to embers, Ayanna crept to Malachi's side. She whispered so softly, even the trees seemed to lean closer. Our father said you would come. Said the scar on your neck was proof. Malachi's hand touched the thin white line at his throat, the scar he had tried to forget. Proof of what? He asked. That you were chosen, the girl said simply. Chosen to finish what he started. Before Malachi could press her, a distant sound split the night. The rhythm of boots on stone, disciplined and unhurried. Soldiers, coming closer. Ayanna rose silently, her knife already in hand. The children clutched the empty pouch like it still carried the weight of destiny. Malachi felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The ashes had told their story, but the war for the truth was only beginning. The first glow of dawn touched the treetops when the thunder of hooves shook the clearing. Malachi was already on his feet, axe in one hand, rifle in the other. The twins pressed against Ayanna Running Bear, their faces pale in the dim light. Bound and bleeding at the mouth, Cyrus Langford grinned like a man who had been waiting for this exact moment. They're here, he said, and you can't stop them. 20 cavalrymen in blue surged from the trees, their sabers glinting, their rifles leveled with precision. At their head rode Captain James Morrison, straight-backed, jaw set, eyes cold. He dismounted slowly, the polished boots hitting the earth with the weight of authority. Malachi Brooks, Morrison called, his voice carrying like thunder. Step away from those children. They are wards of the United States government. Ayanna spat into the dirt. Government? Or your pocket? Morrison's eyes flicked to her, then back to Malachi. I know who you are. I know what you did to Jacob Running Bear. A shame, really. He could have been useful. The children stiffened at their father's name. Malachi's grip on the rifle tightened. You'll keep his name out of your mouth. Morrison's smile was thin, cruel. The man was a pawn, same as you, same as those orphans. That mine belongs to the government now, and I'll see it taken, one way or another. The soldiers raised their rifles in unison. Ayanna slid in front of the children, blade flashing in the weak dawn light. Malachi planted himself between them and the cavalry. The clearing felt too small, the air too thin. You'll have to go through me, Malachi growled. Morrison's hand went to his saber. Then so be it. Before the order could fall, Ayanna shouted in her native tongue, a sharp cry that echoed through the forest. The pines answered with movement. From the shadows emerged warriors on horseback, their faces painted, their bows drawn. For every soldier in blue, there was a rider cloaked in the colors of the mountain. The air went taut as a drawn bowstring. One wrong move, and the clearing would drown in blood. Morrison sneered, but his eyes flickered uneasily at the sight of the ambush. "Do you think this rabble will scare me, Brooks? Do you think arrows can stop progress?" Malachi lifted his axe high, the blade catching dawn's first light. His voice was steady, a mountain's voice. "Not arrows, promises. This land isn't yours to take, and I'll die before I let you have it." The tension snapped. A soldier's rifle cracked. An arrow answered. The clearing erupted in chaos, gunpowder smoke and the whistle of arrows filling the morning air. Malachi charged forward, axe swinging like thunder. Morrison's saber flashed as he met the giant's fury head-on. Smoke choked the clearing. The sharp crack of rifles mixed with the hiss of arrows and the screams of men falling into the mud. Horses reared, their riders thrown into chaos. But through it all, Malachi saw only one man, Captain Morrison, his saber gleaming like a streak of fire in the morning haze. Morrison lunged first, his blade slicing the air where Malachi's head had been a heartbeat earlier. Malachi ducked, swinging his axe in a wide arc that clashed against steel with a ringing note that shook his bones. Sparks flew, the force of the impact numbing his arms. "You think you can stop me with woodcutter's tools?" Morrison snarled, driving forward with practiced precision. "I was forged by war. I am the future." Malachi gritted his teeth, blocking a thrust that nearly split his ribs. "Future built on lies," he growled, pushing back with sheer strength. "On children's graves." They circled each other in the chaos, soldiers firing blindly, warriors shouting war cries, arrows slicing the air. Every man and woman gave the fight space, as if the earth itself demanded this clash play out. Morrison feinted left, then drove right. The saber kissed Malachi's arm, drawing blood. The giant staggered, but didn't fall. With a roar that echoed off the mountains, he swung his axe downward, forcing Morrison back a step, then another. Ayana's voice cut through the din. "Malachi!" She tossed him a hunting knife. He caught it in his left hand, turning the duel into a brutal dance of steel and iron. Morrison's eyes narrowed. "You can't win. You're a criminal, a murderer. When they drag your body from this clearing, history will call me a hero." Malachi bared his teeth. "Then let's give history something real to remember." They clashed again, axe against saber, knife against fist. Morrison was quicker, sharper, a man trained for duels. But Malachi was relentless, fueled by the weight of his promise and the trust of two children who watched from the shadows. At last, Morrison overextended, driving forward with a killing thrust. Malachi twisted, letting the saber glance off his axe handle, and stepped inside the officer's guard. His knife pressed against Morrison's chest. His axe locked the man's sword arm. For a heartbeat, both men froze, breathing hard, bloodied, eyes locked in hatred. "This ends now," Malachi said, voice low but steady. Morrison spat in his face. "You don't have the courage." But it wasn't courage Malachi needed. It was memory, Jacob Running Bear's final plea, the children's trust, Ayana's unwavering stare. He shoved Morrison backward, forcing him into the mud. The captain's saber fell from his hand, swallowed by the earth. The duel was finished, but the battle around them still raged. Ayana's cry pierced the smoke. "Malachi, behind you!" Malachi turned at Ayana's warning, raising his axe just in time to block a bayonet thrust. The soldier snarled, shoving with all his weight, but the giant shoved harder, sending the man sprawling into the mud. Around them, the battle was breaking apart. The cavalry's disciplined lines had collapsed under the ambush. Half their number lay wounded, the others retreating toward the tree line under a rain of arrows. But Morrison wasn't finished. The captain clawed his way from the mud, face twisted with fury. Blood streaked his cheek, his chest heaving with rage. "You think you've won," he spat. "I'll bring more men, more guns. I'll burn these mountains to ash before I let savages and a woodcutter decide the future." Malachi loomed over him, axe raised. For a moment he saw the easy path. End it now. Split the man's skull. Silence his threats forever. His muscles tensed. The weight of 3 years of guilt pressed down on him. But then his gaze caught the children. Ayanna and Coda stood clutching each other, their young faces marked not by fear, but by expectation. They weren't asking for blood. They were asking for something harder, for him to keep his promise. Malachi lowered the axe. "No, you don't get to make me a murderer again." He kicked Morrison's saber across the dirt. "You'll stand trial, and the world will hear what you've done." Ayanna Running Bear stepped forward, her warriors close behind. She leveled her knife at Morrison's throat. "And if the world won't listen, we will." The cavalry captain's eyes darted between them, searching for an escape that didn't exist. At last, he slumped, broken more by their refusal to kill him than by the battle itself. By noon, the smoke had cleared. The wounded were tended, the dead carried away. The blue uniforms that had once marched with pride now lay in a silent row, their cause buried with them. Morrison sat bound against a pine, his threats reduced to muttering no one bothered to hear. The children approached Malachi, the leather pouch still clutched between them, empty now, its secrets scattered to the wind. The girl held it out. "It's yours," she said softly. "Our father trusted you. So do we." Malachi stared at the pouch, then closed their small hands back around it. "No, it's yours. What your father left you wasn't a mine or a secret. It was freedom. Don't ever let anyone take it." Ayanna Running Bear placed a hand on his shoulder. Her voice carried both gratitude and command. "Then stay with them. They'll need someone strong, someone who remembers what promises mean." For the first time in years, Malachi felt the chains of his solitude break. The mountains no longer felt like a prison, but like a home worth defending. As the sun dipped behind the ridges, he looked at the twins standing beside him, at Ayanna's steady presence, at the tribe gathering in quiet victory. "Your father asked me to protect you," Malachi said, his voice rough but sure. "I promise I always will." The clearing grew quiet, the echoes of battle fading into the hush of evening. For the first time in 3 years, Malachi Brooks felt peace.